So this is the last video about genotype, phenotype, and their application. The learning outcome is that you have to explain the meaning of the terms genotype and phenotype and assess their importance in animal and plant breeding. Even before that, we have to say what makes genotype and phenotype different. So the main thing that makes genotype different is that genotype is the genetic makeup of the organism. So this is usually denoted by symbols like big B and small b, while phenotype is the observable traits of the organism such as brown eyes or blue eyes. In general, we need to understand genotype and phenotype so that we can get better output from each animal or plant. This is so that we can get improved traits such as increased milk production in cows or more output when we harvest crops. But why do we need to understand genotype and phenotype if that's the only thing we need to know? Like, we did the equation, but why do we need to do genotype and phenotype? Like, what's the point? The point is there's traditional and modern breeding in plants nowadays, and traditional plant breeding places more emphasis on phenotype, which makes it difficult to identify pure lines of genes, and modern plant breeding is a genotype-based breeding strategy, making it easier to identify pure genes. And to put it simply is that traditional plant breeding is not that efficient and modern plant breeding is very efficient. The only difference is that modern plant breeding requires you to know about the genes. And here are some of the pros and cons about traditional plant breeding and modern plant breeding. Not pros and cons, but how they compare each other. And it takes more time for traditional plant breeding to release a new variety, but it takes less time to release a new variety for modern plant breeding. While dominant genes are typically the ones that are chosen from traditional plant breeding, sometimes recessive alleles are the one you actually want, but selecting them are quite hard. But in modern plant breeding, we could just identify it and replace it very quickly. And I'll explain that in the next couple of slides. And traditional plant breeding depends more on the breeder's ability and evaluation. So it's like a very skill kind of thing. Well, modern plant breeding, you use science, and modern plant breeding is more reliable. So the traditional breeding examples are like hybridization. So it's the one that you've seen I've done in the previous example, but this is for a different plant, and this is like the ancestor of the plant, and it gets get bred into many times until you get the one that you want, and that's the S. angelica. Well, this is just an example. It's very similar to what we've done. Modern plant breeding is very different. This is an example of normal plant breeding. So it goes down to the genetic level where you have to identify a certain allele that not even allele, like that you want to, substitute or edit. And this is what we call gene editing. And very fancy stuff, but yeah, just know that we need to know about the genotype for this to happen. And yeah, that's all you need to know actually. I don't want to get too deep into this because that's beyond your scope. So yeah, these are the references I use, and hopefully you got a good time. Thank you.